At my sister's wedding dinner, she thought it would be hilarious to grab the microphone and introduce me to her wealthy new in-laws like this. This is my older sister, just a trauma nurse who cleans up other people's messes. She laughed. My dad burst out laughing. My mom smirked. But the humiliation ended the second the groom's father stared at me. Wait, you are the girl who... His next words froze the entire room and unraveled my family's perfectly constructed lies. My name is Blair, and I am 33 years old. For my entire life, my family treated me like the disposable scapegoat, while my younger sister Chelsea got whatever she wanted. But today, their arrogance collided with reality. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who desperately try to tear you down. Growing up in a pristine Boston suburb, everything was about appearances. My father Richard and my mother Patricia obsessed over social climbing. They practically worshipped my sister Chelsea, who spent her days trying to look rich while completely ignoring how hard real life could be. I chose a different path. I became a flight and trauma nurse working grueling shifts to save lives. My parents hated my career choice. They called it blue-collar grunt work and kicked me out of the house at 18 because I refused to major in business. They wanted a corporate puppet, not a nurse. Chelsea was 30 now, marrying Desmond, an incredibly intelligent African-American man whose family built a massive medical technology empire from scratch. Desmond's father, Winston, was a self-made billionaire. They were a family of substance integrity and hard work, everything my parents pretended to be, but absolutely were not. My family spent $150,000 on this wedding just to impress Winston and his elegant wife Camille. They rented the most expensive ballroom in the city, ordered imported orchids, and served beluga caviar. They wanted Desmond's family to think we were American royalty. The reception was in full swing when Chelsea stood up and clinked her champagne glass. The 150 guests quieted down as she took the microphone. She started by praising our parents, crying fake tears about how much wealth and culture they had provided her. She boasted about her new high society life with Desmond, flashing her diamond ring under the chandeliers. Then her eyes locked onto me, sitting quietly near the back. Her smile turned sharp and cruel. She pointed right at me. And of course, we cannot forget my older sister Blair, she announced, her voice echoing through the massive ballroom. She is just a trauma nurse. She spends her days cleaning up other people's messes. Chelsea laughed, a high-pitched mocking sound. Beside her at the head table, my father Richard let out a loud booming laugh. My mother Patricia smirked, taking a slow sip of her champagne. They loved it. They loved putting me in my place in front of billionaires, making sure Desmond's family knew I was the lowly worker bee of the family. They expected me to lower my head in shame. They expected me to shrink into my chair and take the humiliation quietly like I did when I was a teenager. Instead of shrinking, I stood up. The fabric of my custom silk gown rustled as I pushed my chair back. I did not mention the past. I did not cry about how they threw me out of the house. I looked right at the present reality. I raised my water glass and smiled brightly. I do clean up messes, Chelsea, I said, projecting my voice so every single person at those tables could hear me clearly. Just like how I had to pay the florist's $5,000 deposit this morning because Dad's platinum credit card was declined for insufficient funds. The entire ballroom gasped in unison. The silence that followed was so absolute you could hear a pin drop. Chelsea's smug smile instantly vanished, replaced by sheer panic. My mother Patricia froze with her champagne glass halfway to her mouth. My father Richard turned a violent shade of purple, the veins in his neck bulging against his tuxedo collar. His mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land, but no words came out. The pristine illusion of their massive wealth was shattered in exactly one sentence. The incredibly wealthy guests shifted uncomfortably in their expensive velvet seats, whispering furiously to one another about the shocking revelation. The carefully curated facade my parents had spent so many months building was crumbling piece by piece right before their eyes. The beautiful imported white orchids on the tables suddenly seemed less like a symbol of wealth and more like a desperate, pathetic cry for societal validation. I remained standing, my posture perfectly straight, my expression completely unbothered by their rapidly rising panic. I had spent years working in chaotic trauma centers, dealing with literal life and death situations on rescue helicopters roaring through turbulent skies. A massive room full of completely shocked socialites and angry parents was absolutely nothing compared to that intense stress. I felt an incredible sense of freedom wash over me. The invisible chains of expectation snapped and fell away. Richard gripped the edge of the head table, his knuckles turning stark white against the crisp linen tablecloth. He was preparing to loudly scream at me, to forcefully drag me out by my arm like he used to do when I was a teenager. He took a furious step forward, his eyes locked on mine with pure hatred. But right before my father could unleash his toxic rage and attack me in front of the crowd, someone else decided to intervene. A chair scraped loudly against the marble floor at the groom's table. Winston Desmond's billionaire father rose to his feet with undeniable authority. He ignored my father and locked his intense gaze directly on me. The heavy scrape of Winston's chair against the polished marble floor echoed like a gunshot. The room, previously buzzing with the shocked whispers of 150 high society guests, went dead silent. Winston was a man who commanded absolute power without ever raising his voice. He was a self-made titan in the medical technology industry, a man whose presence alone could dictate the rise and fall of corporate empires. He bypassed my father completely. Richard stood there with his fists clenched, his face still flushed with unspent rage, but he immediately backed down. "You do not yell in front of Winston if you want to keep your social standing." Winston did not even glance at the head table. He walked with slow, deliberate steps until he stood directly in front of my table. His sharp, calculating eyes scanned my face, searching for confirmation of something only he understood. Chelsea gripped the edge of the bridal table, her knuckles white, desperate to reclaim the attention she had just lost. She opened her mouth to speak, to make another cruel joke and steer the spotlight back to her custom designer gown, but Winston raised a single hand. The gesture instantly silenced her. "Is it really you?" Winston asked, his deep voice carrying through the cavernous ballroom. He took a step closer, staring at me with an intensity that made the surrounding guests lean in, hungry for the drama. "Aspen, Colorado, last December, Route 82, during the worst whiteout blizzard of the decade." I met his gaze and nodded slowly. "I remember," I said. Winston turned to address the crowd, his posture rigid with sudden emotion. He gestured toward me. "1 year ago, my vehicle was run off an icy mountain road. I was trapped in the wreckage, my airway completely crushed. I was suffocating. The paramedics could not reach me because the roads were completely blocked by snow and overturned cars. But a rescue helicopter managed to land on a dangerous, narrow ridge nearby. A flight nurse rappelled down the embankment in 50-mile-per-hour winds, crawled into the crushed frame of my car, and performed an emergency tracheotomy with a pocket scalpel and a plastic tube. She saved my life and vanished back into the storm before I even woke up in the hospital. I only ever knew her first name." The ballroom erupted into a frenzy of shocked murmurs. Guests who had been laughing at my expense just seconds ago were now staring at me with wide-eyed reverence. Desmond the groom sat up straight. He looked at me, a profound respect dawning on his face. His family built their legacy on grit and integrity, and finding out his new sister-in-law was the anonymous hero who saved his father was a revelation he clearly had not anticipated. Chelsea practically vibrated with furious jealousy. She hated that I was suddenly the center of a heroic narrative. She grabbed her microphone, her voice high and strained. "Well, that is just my sister." She forced a plastic laugh, always doing the blue-collar grunt work. "It is a crazy coincidence, Winston. But can we please get back to the wedding toast? I have so much more to say about my beautiful new life with Desmond." Winston turned his head slowly and pinned Chelsea with a look of absolute disdain. "It is not a coincidence, Chelsea," he stated coldly, "and I am not finished speaking." He reached into the breast pocket of his tailored tuxedo and pulled out his smartphone. He tapped the screen a few times, bringing up a secure corporate document. He held the phone up, looking between my parents, Chelsea, and finally me. When you survive a near-death experience, you start looking at the world differently, Winston announced to the silent room. You start looking for ways to prevent others from dying in those exact situations. For the past 6 months, my conglomerate has been tracking a revolutionary medical technology startup, an artificial intelligence platform designed specifically for trauma nurses and first responders to diagnose crush injuries in the field. It is brilliant. It is flawless. It is going to save thousands of lives. My father Richard scoffed loudly, unable to read the room. Winston. I fail to see what some tech company has to do with my daughter ruining Chelsea's special night. Winston ignored him completely. The founder of this startup was notoriously anonymous. Winston continued, his voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. She insisted on operating under the initials B.W. She refused all press, refused all interviews, and negotiated the entire acquisition through a proxy legal team. My board of directors finalized the acquisition of her company exactly 24 hours ago. Winston stepped directly in front of my chair. He looked down at me, a proud smile finally breaking across his stern face. "We transferred the funds this morning," Winston declared loudly. $40 million. The collective gasp from the room was deafening. "It is an honor to finally meet you in person, Blair Wilson," Winston said, extending his hand to me. Or should I say, BW? I stood up and shook the billionaire's hand firmly. "The pleasure is mine, Winston," I replied calmly. The absolute devastation that swept across the head table was magnificent to witness. The sheer weight of the number $40 million dropped into the silent ballroom like a concrete block. Chelsea's smug, entitled smile completely vanished. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and suddenly very small. Her grand illusion of superiority had just been violently crushed by a reality she could not comprehend. I was not just a nurse cleaning up messes. I was a self-made multi-millionaire. I had achieved a level of success that her superficial social climbing could never replicate. My father Richard physically staggered backwards, bumping into the floral arrangement behind him, his eyes wide. My mother Patricia simply froze in absolute undeniable terror. Patricia abruptly transforms her face into a mask of pure maternal joy. She shoves past a waiter to rush toward me with her arms outstretched. Her heavy perfume hits me before she attempts to pull me into a tight camera-ready embrace. She completely ignores that she was just laughing at my expense moments ago. "Oh, my beautiful, brilliant girl," Patricia cries out, her voice loud enough to echo toward the billionaire family nearby. "We knew you were working on something special." Richard instantly catches on to her desperate pivot. He abandons his defensive posture and marches over, plastering on the jovial, booming persona he uses to close real estate deals. He reaches out to grab my shoulder, turning toward Winston and the shocked guests. "That is my daughter for you," Richard announces, laughing heartily, as if sharing a private joke with the silent room. "She has always been the smartest person in the room. I taught her everything she knows about business strategy. I could not be more proud of my little girl." I do not let his hand touch my shoulder. I take a swift, deliberate step backward. The sudden movement leaves Richard grasping at empty air. His smile falters, but he tries to recover quickly, lowering his voice to a harsh whisper. "Stop making a scene and hug your mother," he commands through gritted teeth. "People are watching us." I look at him, feeling absolutely nothing but cold clarity. "People are watching," I say, my voice projecting clearly across the silent ballroom. "Good. Let them see exactly who you are. You did not teach me a single thing about business strategy, Richard. You taught me about survival. You taught me how to pack my entire life into a black plastic trash bag in under 10 minutes. Patricia gasps loudly, looking around frantically at the whispering guests. "Blair, please," she pleads, reaching for my wrist. "This is a wedding. We can talk about the past later." I pull my wrist out of her reach. "There is no later," I tell her, making sure Camille and Desmond can hear every single word. "You do not get to claim my success today when you actively tried to destroy my future 15 years ago. When I was 18, I sat at our kitchen table and told you both I wanted to go to nursing school to actually help people. You threw a glass of scotch at the wall, Richard. You told me that nurses were just glorified maids for doctors. You told me that if I did not accept the admission to the business program you selected, I was dead to you. You dragged me out the front door by my arm and locked it behind me while I stood on the porch, freezing in the snow. Richard's face turns an ugly, mottled red. That was tough love, he stammers, looking desperately toward Winston. I was pushing you to reach your full potential. You were a stubborn teenager who needed discipline. I did not need discipline. I fire back the raw truth, hitting the room like a physical strike. I needed parents. But you only wanted trophies you could show off at the country club. Chelsea played the game. She wore the clothes she repeated your lies, and she gave you the illusion of high society perfection. I chose to work double shifts in the emergency room. I chose to build a company that detects internal bleeding so patients do not die while waiting for a scan. I built my empire with the same hands you called blue-collar trash. So do not call me your daughter now that you see a $40 million price tag on my head. The silence in the ballroom is absolute. No one moves. No one breathes. Winston stands tall, his expression turning to one of deep, validating respect. Camille Desmond's mother nods slowly, her eyes locking onto mine with quiet solidarity. She sees right through my parents, and they know it. The facade of the wealthy, loving family is completely destroyed. Richard and Patricia stand frozen in the center of the room, stripped bare of their lies, looking like the pathetic, hollow people they truly are. Then a sharp, violent sound shatters the quiet. Chelsea screams. It is not a graceful cry. It is a primal, unhinged shriek of pure rage. She grabs her crystal champagne flute from the head table and hurls it fiercely against the nearest marble pillar. The glass explodes into hundreds of glittering shards that rain down onto the dance floor. Several guests jump back in alarm. Desmond stares at his bride, his jaw clenched, watching her entire carefully manicured personality disintegrate. "This is my wedding," Chelsea shrieks, her voice cracking as she stomps her foot. "This is my day, my perfect day, and you are ruining it on purpose. You always want to take what is mine. You planned this just to steal my spotlight." Her chest heaves as she glares at me. She does not care about the lies. She does not care about the cruelty I just exposed. She only cares that the room is no longer looking at her designer gown. She marches toward Richard and Patricia, grabbing them both by their expensive clothes. "Fix this right now!" Chelsea snarls at them, her eyes wild with panic and fury. I want her out of my sight. Drag her into the bridal suite before she ruins anything else. We are going to the bridal suite right now to fix this disaster. She turns and storms toward the heavy oak doors of the private suite, expecting her parents to herd me inside like a disobedient child. Richard and Patricia look at me, their eyes flashing with a new, dangerous desperation. They have lost the crowd, but they think they can still control me in private. They think the bridal suite will hide their next move. They are setting a trap, unaware that I am ready to spring it. The heavy oak doors of the bridal suite slam shut. The thick soundproofing swallowed the ambient noise, leaving only the sound of Chelsea pacing the expensive carpet like a caged animal. She kicked a velvet ottoman, her custom designer gown twisting violently around her ankles. My parents dropped their camera-ready smiles the second the latch clicked. The proud, doting parents from the ballroom vanished. In their place stood the real Richard and Patricia, calculating and thoroughly enraged. My father did not apologize. He did not ask how I built a medical technology empire while working 12-hour trauma shifts. He simply marched across the room and blocked the exit. He squared his shoulders, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me just like he did when I was a teenager. It did not work then, and it definitely was not going to work now. "You are going to fix this," Richard demanded, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You are going to march right back out there and tell Winston that Chelsea is a vital part of your little company. You are going to make her look good in front of Desmond's family. And since you are apparently sitting on $40 million, you are going to pay the entire bill for this wedding." I stared at him, genuinely impressed by the sheer magnitude of his delusion. "The bill for this wedding is $150,000, I stated, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "And you owe it to your sister," Patricia chimed in, stepping forward to flank my father. She wrung her hands together, shifting instantly into her favorite role of the long-suffering peacekeeper. Family supports family, Blair. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. Chelsea's special day is completely ruined because you decided to show off and embarrass us. Paying for this reception is the absolute least you can do to compensate her for the emotional distress you just caused. Chelsea stopped pacing and glared at me. Her mascara was slightly smudged, but the greed in her eyes was crystal clear. Desmond is furious, she hissed, crossing her arms over her chest. His family thinks we are trash now because of your little stunt. You have $40 million, Blair. 150 grand is pocket change to you. You are going to pay the venue, pay the florist, and pay the caterers right now. I slowly reached into my clutch. My parents watched me, a sickening look of victory flashing across their faces. They actually thought I was reaching for a checkbook. They really believed that after a lifetime of treating me like a burden, all they had to do was demand my money, and I would hand it over. Instead of a checkbook, I pulled out my smartphone. I tapped the screen, opened the voice memo app, and hit the bright red record button. I held the phone up so they could all see the timer ticking upward. "Let me make sure I have this right for the record," I said, smiling politely. "I was kicked out of your house at 18 with zero financial support. I worked night shifts to pay for my own nursing degree. I built a company from the ground up while you called my profession blue-collar grunt work. But now, because my sister threw a temper tantrum at her own wedding after publicly insulting me, you are demanding I hand over $150,000. Put that phone away," Richard barked, lunging forward to grab it. I took a swift step back, dodging his hands. "Touch me, and I will add assault to the very public scene I am absolutely willing to make," I warned him. My voice held the icy authority I used to manage chaotic emergency rooms. Richard froze, his hand suspended in midair. He knew I was not bluffing. "You are acting like a sociopath," Patricia cried out, her voice shrill with panic as she realized her emotional manipulation was completely failing. "We are your family. We share the same blood. You cannot just hoard millions of dollars while your sister is in crisis. That money belongs to this family. That money belongs to me," I corrected her sharply. "I earned it. I built it. You do not get a single cent. Not for this wedding, not for Chelsea's designer dresses, and certainly not to uphold your pathetic facade of wealth. You wanted me to be a failure so badly, Patricia. You should have learned to survive without me." Chelsea let out another shriek of frustration, grabbing a decorative vase from the vanity table as if she wanted to throw it at me. She caught her reflection in the mirror and slammed the vase down, breathing heavily. She looked at our father, demanding he do something, demanding he force me into submission just like he always did. Richard lowered his hand and straightened his jacket. The explosive rage on his face shifted into something far more calculating. His eyes narrowed, and a cruel, confident smirk slowly spread across his face. He looked like a man who had just remembered he held a trump card. "You are going to pay for this wedding, Blair," Richard stated, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "And you are going to transfer a 10% stake of your buyout directly into my holding account by Monday morning." I laughed right in his face. "Are you insane?" I asked. "I am calling my legal team," Richard replied, pulling out his own phone. "You started that little medical company 5 years ago. Do you think I will not tell a judge you stole seed money from my family business to fund your startup? You lived under my roof for 18 years. I will claim intellectual property theft. I will claim you embezzled corporate funds. I will tie your $40 million up in litigation for the next decade unless you pay me." I let out a laugh. It started low in my chest, a dark, resonant sound that bounced off the soundproofed walls of the bridal suite. It was the sound of absolute victory. I looked at Richard, watching the veins bulge in his neck, watching the desperate, sweat-soaked reality of his situation crash into his ridiculous bluff. He thought he still held power. "You are going to sue me?" I asked, stepping right into his personal space, forcing him to look me in the eye. "You are going to take me to court and claim I stole your money?" Richard puffed out his chest, trying to maintain his authoritative posture. "I absolutely will," he growled. "You use the business acumen you absorbed under my roof. I am entitled to compensation." I shook my head slowly, the smile never leaving my face. You are a terrible liar, Richard. You have always been a terrible liar, but today you are an especially pathetic one. I raised my phone. I simply opened a new tab. I had been preparing for this day for months. When Winston finalized the acquisition, I hired the best forensic accountants in New York City to run a full, unredacted background check on the people who shared my last name. I wanted to know exactly who I was dealing with before I walked into this wedding. I wanted to know exactly what kind of armor they were wearing. It turned out they were wearing paper. I pulled up a specific highlighted PDF document. I stepped forward and shoved the glowing screen directly into Richard's chest, pressing it hard against his expensive tuxedo lapel. "Read it," I commanded. "Read it out loud for Patricia. Read it out loud for Chelsea." Richard looked down. The transformation was instantaneous. The arrogant patriarch completely evaporated. The color drained from his flushed face, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified old man. His hands started to shake. He tried to push the phone away, but I held it firmly against his chest. "What is it?" Patricia demanded, her voice shrill with sudden panic. "Richard, what is she showing you?" "He cannot say it." I told my mother, my voice echoing with icy precision. "He cannot form the words because the words destroy the only thing he cares about. So I will say it for him. 6 months ago, Wilson Manufacturing filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in federal court." Patricia gasped, stumbling backward as if she had been physically struck. She grabbed the edge of a velvet armchair to steady herself. "No," she whispered, her eyes darting between me and her husband. "No, that is a lie. Richard, tell her that is a lie. We just paid for this reception." "You did not pay for anything," I corrected her sharply. "You financed it. You maxed out lines of credit. You took out predatory loans against assets you no longer even own. Your company is a hollow shell. Your bank accounts are bleeding dry. You are completely broke, Patricia. You are living on borrowed time and plastic cards. Every designer dress, every catered meal, every ounce of champagne poured in that ballroom right now is bought with money you do not possess." A sharp intake of breath echoed from the doorway. We all turned. Chelsea stood there. She had stopped pacing. She stood frozen by the heavy oak doors, her face an absolute mask of horror. She had been listening. She had heard every single word. The reality of her existence was crashing down around her. Her entire identity was built on wealth, on status, on being better than everyone else. And now I had just exposed that she was poorer than the waitress serving her wedding cake. "You are bankrupt," Chelsea asked, her voice trembling. Her eyes were wide, darting toward Richard. "Daddy, tell me she is lying. Tell me she made those documents up." Richard could not meet her gaze. He stared at the floor, his silence confirming everything. I stepped away from Richard and turned my attention fully to my parents. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together with sickening clarity. I looked at the extravagant bridal suite, the overflowing floral arrangements, the ridiculous excess of this entire wedding. It was never about a celebration. It was a transaction. "You are drowning," I stated, cornering my parents against the vanity table. I locked my eyes onto Patricia, then shifted to Richard. "You are drowning in debt, and you thought this wedding was your life raft. You thought marrying Chelsea into Desmond's family was your ultimate financial bailout. Desmond is heir to $1 billion real estate dynasty. You needed his family to merge with yours so you could quietly absorb their capital and save your sinking ship." Patricia began to cry, actual genuine tears of absolute desperation. She tried to cover her face, her perfect makeup ruined by the sheer terror of exposure. "We had to protect the family name," she sobbed quietly. "We could not let society know. We would lose everything." "You already lost everything," I fired back. "And you almost took a deeply innocent man down with you." "Desmond does not know, does he? Winston does not know. You are trying to scam a billionaire family into marrying a bankrupt fraud." Chelsea let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. The panic in her eyes transformed instantly into pure venomous hatred. The realization that she was no longer a wealthy heiress, combined with the crushing humiliation that her discarded sister was now worth $40 million, broke her sanity completely. She was backed into a corner, and a cornered animal is always the most dangerous. "Shut up!" Chelsea screamed, her voice tearing through her throat. "Shut your mouth right now!" She lunged forward, grabbing her silk skirts in fistfuls. She marched toward the door, her face twisted into a mask of pure malice. She did not care about the bankruptcy anymore. She only cared about survival. She only cared about maintaining her illusion at any cost. She grabbed the brass handle of the door. "You are not going to tell them," Chelsea snarled, looking back at me with eyes full of violent intent. "Desmond is mine. His family's money is mine. I will not let you ruin my life just because you got lucky with some stupid computer program. I am going to destroy you, Blair. I am going to walk out there and I am going to destroy you before Desmond's family finds out we are broke." She yanked the heavy wooden door open and stormed out. I step out of the heavy oak doors of the bridal suite, leaving the suffocating air of my parents' financial ruin behind me. The live band thumps against the floorboards, a stark contrast to the silence I just created inside that room. I adjust the strap of my clutch, taking a deep breath of the air-conditioned ballroom. I have done what I needed to do. The truth is, out the 40 million is secure, and my family's pathetic extortion attempt lies dead on the carpet. It is time to go. I weave through the tables, dodging oblivious guests who are still gossiping about Winston's grand revelation. Some try to catch my eye, eager to mingle with the newly minted millionaire, but I keep my gaze fixed on the grand exit doors. I just want the quiet sanctuary of a waiting town car. Across the room, Chelsea is a woman coming apart at the seams. She stands near the towering ice sculpture, her knuckles white, her chest heaving as she watches my calm retreat. Her entire world is collapsing. The bankruptcy documents I shoved in Richard's face are burned into her mind. She is not an heiress marrying into a billionaire dynasty. She is a fraud, a desperate woman clinging to maxed-out credit cards and a fake pedigree. She knows I hold the power to expose her completely. The sight of me walking away unscathed, radiating the very power she desperately craves, snaps the last fragile thread of her sanity. She cannot let me leave. She needs a distraction. She needs to drag me down to the floor to humiliate me so severely that Desmond's family forgets about the $40 million and only sees a messy, stained embarrassment. Her frantic eyes dart around the perimeter of the dance floor. She spots a young catering waiter emerging from the kitchen doors, balancing a massive silver tray loaded with freshly poured glasses of Cabernet Sauvignon. It is a sea of dark, staining crimson. Chelsea moves with terrifying purpose. She intercepts the waiter, her fake smile plastered back on her face. She reaches out abruptly, taking the heavy tray from his hands. The waiter protests, trying to maintain his grip, but Chelsea snaps a harsh command under her breath, forcing him to step back. She turns her eyes, locking onto my midnight blue silk gown. It is a calculated, vicious targeting system. She grips the edges of the silver tray, accelerating her pace as she angles her trajectory to intersect my path toward the exit. She is moving too fast for a bride in a heavy gown, her heels clicking violently against the marble floor. I am 10 feet away from the exit when my peripheral vision registers the rapid movement. Working in a Level 1 trauma center trains your body to anticipate chaos before your brain even processes it. You learn to read the slight shift in a patient's shoulders before they swing, the sudden intake of breath before a panic attack. I see Chelsea lunging toward me, her eyes wide and manic, the massive tray of red wine tipping dangerously forward. She fakes a dramatic stumble, twisting her ankle with theatrical flair, and thrusts her arms out. She launches the tray like a projectile, sending glasses of dark red wine hurtling directly toward my chest. She expects me to freeze. She expects the shock to paralyze me while the crimson liquid ruins my dress and my dignity. But my body reacts on pure, ingrained instinct. I plant my left foot, shifting my entire center of gravity, and execute a swift, fluid sidestep. The heavy silver tray and the flying wave of Cabernet sail through the exact space I occupied a microsecond earlier. Time seems to stretch out, bending into a slow-motion nightmare. The wine does not hit the marble floor. It finds a target standing directly behind where I just stood. The sickening splash of liquid hitting fabric echoes through the immediate area, followed by a sharp, horrified gasp. Camille Desmond's mother stands frozen in place. The entire wave of dark red wine has crashed squarely into her chest. The crimson liquid violently stains her vintage pearl gown, an heirloom she had flown in from Paris specifically for this evening. The dark stain bleeds rapidly across the delicate silk, dripping down her skirt and splashing onto her diamond-encrusted shoes. The impact shatters the glasses against the floor, raining sharp crystal shrapnel around Camille's feet. A collective shriek goes up from the surrounding guests. The lead singer of the band falters, his voice cracking into the microphone before the music screeches to an abrupt, jarring halt. Total suffocating silence falls over the ballroom, broken only by the sound of red wine dripping onto the marble. Chelsea stares at the devastation, the silver tray clattering out of her hands. The color drains from her face. She realizes instantly that she has not humiliated me. She has just publicly desecrated the matriarch of the billionaire family she is trying to con. Panic seizes her throat. She spins around, pointing a trembling finger at the young catering waiter she robbed moments ago. "He tripped me." Chelsea screams, her voice echoing in the dead quiet room. "He pushed the tray into my hands and tripped me. It was the catering staff. Someone fire him right now." She looks around wildly, expecting the room to rally behind her. But the crowd remains frozen, staring at her in stunned horror. From the shadows near the grand exit, a tall figure steps forward. Desmond walks slowly toward his new wife, bypassing his drenched, shaking mother. He does not look at the waiter. He does not even look at me. He stops inches from Chelsea, his eyes burning with a cold fury. "Do not blame the staff," Chelsea Desmond states, his voice low, but carrying absolute authority. "I was standing right there. I watched you grab that tray. I saw exactly what you just did." Desmond rushed to his mother, his face pale with concern as he grabbed a stack of linen napkins from a nearby table. He dropped to his knees beside Camille, frantically dabbing at the dark spreading stain on her vintage silk gown. The sharp scent of red wine filled the tense air. Chelsea ignored her new mother-in-law entirely. Her panic morphed instantly into venomous rage. She whirled around and pointed a trembling finger at the young catering waiter who stood frozen in shock. "You clumsy idiot!" Chelsea shrieked, her voice echoing harshly against the marble walls. "Do you have any idea what you just did? I am going to have you fired. I am going to make sure you never work in this city again. You are nothing but incompetent minimum wage trash." The waiter shrank back, his eyes wide with fear, stammering an apology for something he did not do. Desmond stopped wiping his mother's dress. He slowly stood up, letting the stained linen napkins drop to the floor. He turned to face his bride, his expression transforming from concern into a cold, hard glare. "Stop yelling at him!" "Chelsea," Desmond commanded, his voice deadly quiet, but carrying enough weight to silence her. "I was standing right there. I watched you snatch that tray out of his hands. I saw exactly what you just did. You aimed it directly at your sister." Chelsea recoiled as if she had been slapped. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, taking in the horrified faces of the guests, the catering staff, and Winston, who was watching the scene with absolute revulsion. She realized her perfect facade was cracking, and instead of showing remorse, she doubled down. She squared her shoulders and glared at me. "She does not belong here," Chelsea screamed, gesturing wildly in my direction. "Look at her. She is a nurse. She works with her hands. This is a high society event. This is my wedding. She is deliberately trying to drag us down to her level. You cannot possibly expect me to just stand by and let her ruin the aesthetic of our perfect day. She is trash, Desmond. She has always been trash." Camille gently pushed Desmond aside and stepped forward. She did not scream. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked at Chelsea with an expression of profound pity. She wiped a drop of red wine from her diamond necklace with absolute calm. "You are deeply confused about what constitutes high society, Chelsea," Camille stated, her tone chillingly polite. "True wealth does not require you to scream at the staff. True class does not require you to tear down your own family to make yourself feel taller. In our family, we value character, integrity, and honor. We do not value bank accounts, and we certainly do not value women who throw temper tantrums and attack innocent workers to cover up their own malicious behavior. The rebuke hit Chelsea like a physical blow. The reality that she was losing the approval of the billionaire matriarch sent her into a complete, unhinged spiral. Her desperation made her reckless. She took a step toward Camille, holding her hands up in a frantic, pleading gesture. "You do not understand." "Camille." Chelsea stammered her voice, taking on a whiny, conspiratorial tone. "You and we have to maintain a certain standard. People like us, we have to protect our circles from people who do not fit in. You know exactly what I mean. We cannot just let anyone into our world. People who do not come from our background, people who do not look like us or act like us, they just drag down the neighborhood. They ruin the pedigree. You have to understand how hard it is to maintain upper-class standards when you have family members who insist on living like common laborers." The collective gasp from the ballroom was audible. Chelsea had completely lost her grip on reality. In her desperate attempt to align herself with Camille's wealth, she had let her deepest, ugliest prejudices spill out for everyone to hear. She had insulted not just me, but the diverse self-made people in Desmond's own extended family. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Desmond stared at the woman he had just married. The illusion was entirely shattered. He looked at her not with anger, but with pure, unadulterated disgust. He took a slow step backward, physically distancing himself from her. "I do not even know who you are," Desmond said, his voice shaking with a mix of sorrow and revulsion. "You are the ugliest person I have ever met. I cannot believe I just tied my life to yours." Chelsea let out a pathetic, whimpering sob. "Desmond, please," she begged, reaching out for him. "I am your wife. We just took our vows. You cannot look at me like that." He did not reach back. He simply shook his head, turning his back on her to check on his mother again. The rejection was absolute. Chelsea stood alone in the center of the dance floor, surrounded by broken glass and spilled wine, completely isolated by her own toxic vanity. Her parents remained frozen near the bridal suite doors, too cowardly to step forward and defend the daughter they had created. I watched the pathetic scene unfold. I could have walked away right then. I had won. Chelsea had destroyed her own marriage within hours of the ceremony. Richard and Patricia were exposed as bankrupt frauds. The $40 million was safely sitting in my accounts. But they had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. They had stolen my childhood and tried to steal my future. Letting them walk away with merely a ruined wedding felt insufficient. I stepped forward, my shoes crunching softly over the broken crystal on the floor. "Before you cancel everything completely, Desmond, you really need to hear what else they have been hiding." Desmond froze, turning slowly back toward me. His eyes were completely hollow, stripped of the joy and love he had carried into this room just hours ago. Camille remained still, a stained monument of quiet dignity, her gaze locked on my face. Chelsea scrambled backward, her expensive heels slipping slightly on the cold, wet white marble. "You want to talk about upper-class standards?" I said, my voice cutting through the thick, horrified silence of the ballroom. "You want to talk about maintaining pedigrees and keeping out the trash? Let us talk about standards, Chelsea. Let us talk about what it actually costs to put a crown on a fraud." I did not wait for her to formulate another pathetic excuse. I turned my attention to the grand exit doors. Richard and Patricia were still huddled there. They looked like two rats caught in the blinding glare of a spotlight. They had watched their eldest daughter get publicly dismantled. They had watched their own golden child destroy her marriage. And they had done absolutely nothing. They were cowards. They had always been cowards. I walked straight toward them both. The crowd parted for me, stepping aside as if I were carrying a live grenade. I stopped a few feet away from my parents. Richard refused to meet my eyes. Patricia was openly weeping now, clutching her beaded evening bag like a shield. I looked back at Chelsea, then back to my parents. If you filed for federal bankruptcy 6 months ago, I asked, my voice carrying clearly to every corner of the silent room. If your accounts are drained and your company is a hollow shell, how exactly did you pay for this $150,000 wedding? Chelsea stopped crying. She looked at her parents, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion. The math was finally catching up to her. If there was no money, there could be no wedding. Yet here she stood, surrounded by thousands of imported orchids and custom ice sculptures. I unzipped my clutch. The metallic sound was incredibly loud in the dead quiet of the ballroom. I reached inside and my fingers closed around the thick, folded legal document I had retrieved from my attorney 2 days ago. I pulled it out, holding the heavy parchment up for the entire room to see. My father let out a strangled gasp. He recognized the blue legal backing immediately. When Grandma Rose passed away, she left her estate to be divided, I explained, looking directly at Desmond, making sure he understood the depth of the deception. She knew exactly what kind of people Richard and Patricia were. She knew they would squander her life savings, so she legally bypassed them. She left her historic property in Cambridge, split 50-50 between Chelsea and me. It was supposed to be our safety net, a tangible asset that could never be touched by their reckless financial gambling. But a safety net is just another piggy bank to people who have no moral compass. I continued, stepping closer to Richard. I unfolded the document. I held it out so the bold black text was visible. "This is a notice of a secondary mortgage," I stated coldly. "Taken out exactly 4 months ago, just in time to pay the deposits for this spectacular charade. But you see, taking out a secondary mortgage on a jointly owned property requires the signatures of both legal owners." I looked at my mother. Patricia was shaking so violently I thought she might collapse. "You needed my signature," I said to her. "But you knew I would never agree to mortgage my grandmother's legacy to fund a party. You knew I would demand a full financial audit before signing a single piece of paper. So you bypassed me. You bypassed the law." "Richard and Patricia forged my signature," I announced, dropping the final bomb into the center of the room. "They committed felony fraud. They legally bound me to a massive predatory loan without my knowledge or consent. They mortgaged my grandmother's house, a property I legally owned 50% of, and they used the stolen funds to buy Chelsea's wedding dress. They used stolen money to buy the wine that Chelsea just threw at your mother." The silence that followed was absolute. No one breathed. No one moved. The sheer criminality of the act settled over the crowd, replacing the previous shock of the spilled wine with something far more serious. Chelsea stared at her perfect designer gown, realizing that every thread was woven with stolen money. She looked at her parents, waiting for a denial that never came. Richard simply stared at the floor, his face pale and slick with sweat. Patricia buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. "It is a federal offense," I reminded them, my voice echoing across the ballroom. "Forgery to secure a loan across state lines constitutes wire fraud. You did not just steal from your own daughter. You defrauded a national banking institution. You risked federal prison just to maintain an illusion of wealth that vanished years ago. You risked everything so your golden child could play princess for one single night." At the edge of the dance floor, Desmond straightened his posture. The anger that had been directed at Chelsea now shifted entirely to the document in my hand. Desmond was not just an heir to a real estate empire. He was a man who understood numbers and laws. He was a former auditor for a top accounting firm. He had spent his entire career hunting down financial discrepancies and prosecuting corporate fraud. He knew exactly what wire fraud meant. He knew the legal devastation it would bring to anyone associated with this family. He slowly stepped away from his mother and walked directly toward me. He stopped in front of me. His eyes were intensely focused, analyzing the situation with ruthless, calculating precision. "Forgery," Desmond repeated quietly, asking to see the document. "Please." Richard lunged. The sheer desperation in his eyes transformed him into a cornered animal. He threw his weight forward, grasping wildly for the blue legal backing in my grip. He did not care about the guests watching or the shattered crystal crunching beneath his shoes. He only knew he had to destroy the evidence. Desmond intervened swiftly. He stepped into Richard's path, placing one hand flat against his chest, and shoved him backward with terrifying force. Richard stumbled, nearly crashing into a table of terrified guests before Patricia grabbed his sleeve to steady him. "Do not touch her," Desmond stated, his voice a low hum of warning. "And do not touch that document." Desmond turned back to me. This was the former auditor taking over. This was the man who spent years dissecting corporate fraud and destroying criminals in federal courtrooms. He held his hand out, his palm steady. I placed the secondary mortgage agreement into his waiting hand. The ballroom remained locked in a suffocating silence as Desmond began to read. The only sound was the rustle of parchment as he flipped to the second page. I watched his eyes scan the dense legal jargon, tracing the lines of financial obligations and collateral terms. He examined the dates. He saw the timeline, noting how the mortgage approval perfectly coincided with the massive deposits required for the venue, the caterers, and the florist. Then he reached the final page. I knew exactly what he was looking at. He was staring at the signatures. He was staring at my forged names scrawled clumsily next to the authentic signatures of Richard and Patricia. Desmond lowered the document. He did not look angry anymore. He looked fundamentally disgusted. He slowly turned his gaze directly toward Richard. "You took out a high-yield secondary mortgage on a jointly inherited property." Desmond began, his tone terrifyingly conversational. "You bypassed the legal co-owner. You bypassed standard notary verification. You pushed this through a private lender using falsified consent forms." Richard opened his mouth, but only a dry croak emerged. He tugged at his silk collar, gasping for air. The sweat on his forehead was now dripping down his face, ruining his styled hair. "You committed a Class C felony." Desmond continued, taking a slow step toward my father. "You initiated a fraudulent wire transfer across state lines. You tied your eldest daughter to a mountain of predatory debt without her knowledge. And you did all of this to pay for floral arrangements and caviar." "It is not what it looks like," Richard stammered, his voice cracking. He held up his shaking hands, trying to summon a reassuring smile that looked entirely deranged. "Desmond, please, son. You are looking at this from a rigid legal perspective. This is just family business. It is a family loan misunderstanding. We were going to pay Blair back. We were going to restructure our assets after the wedding and make her completely whole. It is an internal family matter, nothing more." "A family loan misunderstanding," Desmond repeated, tasting the words as if they were poison. "You forged a signature on a federally regulated financial document. That is not a misunderstanding, Richard. That is a federal crime. That carries a mandatory minimum sentence. You are looking at 5 to 10 years in a federal penitentiary for this little family matter." Patricia lunged forward, grabbing Desmond's forearm. Her face was streaked with black mascara, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his tuxedo. "Desmond, please," she begged, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "Keep your voice down. The guests are listening. The society reporters are outside. Please, we can resolve this quietly. We can go into the bridal suite and discuss terms. We will give Blair whatever she wants. Just please stop talking so loudly. You are ruining the family name." Desmond stared at the woman clutching his arm. He gently but firmly peeled her fingers off his tuxedo, stepping away from her as if she were contagious. "Your family name is already ruined," Patricia, Desmond stated, his voice carrying clearly over the dead silence of the ballroom. "Your family name is a bankrupt fraud. You care more about the society reporters outside than the fact that your husband just confessed to a felony. You care more about the foundation board members than the fact that you stole from your own daughter. You are completely morally bankrupt." Desmond turned away from my parents, scanning the extravagant ballroom. He looked at the towering ice sculptures, the imported orchids cascading from the ceiling, the crystal chandeliers glowing overhead. The realization washed over him in real time. Everything he was looking at was stolen. Every bite of food his guests had consumed, every drop of champagne they had toasted with, was paid for with blood money, stolen from a woman his new wife despised. His entire marriage was built on a financial lie. The merger of their families, the carefully negotiated prenuptial agreements, the promises of generational wealth. It was all a calculated scam designed to absorb his family's capital to save Richard's sinking ship. They had targeted him. They had used Chelsea as bait to secure a billionaire bailout. Desmond closed his eyes for a brief moment, inhaling deeply. When he opened his eyes, the absolute finality in his gaze made the air temperature plummet. He slowly turned his head, shifting away from my trembling parents and the ruined grandeur of the reception. His eyes locked onto his bride. Chelsea was still standing near the edge of the dance floor, surrounded by the shattered glass and the dark, spreading stain of the spilled red wine. She looked small, terrified, and entirely alone. The classist monster who had screamed at his mother moments ago was gone, replaced by a trembling fraud waiting for the executioner's block. Desmond took one step toward her. The sound of his shoe crushing a piece of broken crystal was the only noise in the massive room. He held the forged mortgage document out, letting it hang in the space between them. "Did you know about this, Chelsea?" Desmond stared at his wife. "Did you know about this, Chelsea?" He repeated the question, his voice a blank slate. I saw the frantic calculation behind Chelsea's eyes. The aggressive tyrant who screamed at the staff vanished. In her place, a masterclass in manipulation was born. Her lower lip trembled. Her shoulders slumped, making her look small and fragile inside her stolen gown. The tears arrived. They poured, accompanied by ragged theatrical gasps for air. "Desmond, please," she choked out. She took a step toward him, holding her hands up in surrender. "I just found out. I swear to you I only found out a few days ago. I was horrified. I was angry with them." She gestured toward Richard and Patricia, throwing her own parents to the wolves without hesitation. "I begged them to tell you the truth," she sobbed. "I told them we could not start our marriage like this. But they were terrified, Desmond. You have to understand how terrified they were. Explain to me," he said, his tone like cracked ice, "why your parents were terrified enough to commit federal wire fraud." Chelsea let out a pathetic wail. "Because of your family," she cried. "Because of the legacy. Desmond, look at my parents. They lost everything but could not bear the shame of looking like paupers in front of your mother. They could not stand the thought of me joining a billionaire dynasty looking like trash. They just wanted us to be worthy of your world. They did it out of love. They made a terrible mistake because they were intimidated by your wealth and status. They wanted my perfect day to be truly perfect." She reached and grabbed Desmond's hands. Her grip was desperate, her knuckles turning white as she clung to him. "We just took our vows," she pleaded, looking up through a mask of genuine panic. "We stood at that altar and promised for better or for worse. This is the worst, Desmond. But we can get through it. You have the money. We can quietly pay Blair back. We can pay off the mortgage tomorrow and no one ever has to know. We can fix this. I love you so much. Please do not let my parents' stupid mistake destroy our perfect day. Please. Desmond, look at me. I am your wife." Desmond looked down at her hands, gripping his sleeves. The silence stretched agonizing and thick. The guests watched the grotesque spectacle of a bride begging her groom to cover up a felony. Slowly, deliberately, Desmond raised his arms. He did not shove her away. He simply grasped Chelsea's wrists and peeled her hands off his tuxedo. The motion was clinical and entirely devoid of affection. He detached her from his body, as if she were a parasite. He took one deliberate step backward, creating a physical barrier between them that felt wider than an ocean. "You think this is about looking good enough for my family?" Desmond asked, his voice barely above a whisper, yet resonating with absolute clarity. "You think my mother cares about how much this dress costs? You think I care about the price of the caviar or the imported orchids?" Chelsea stared at him, unable to formulate a response to the absolute disgust radiating from her groom. "My father did not inherit a dynasty, Chelsea." Desmond stated, his voice gaining strength, echoing across the silent ballroom. "My father came to this country with $50 in his pocket. He swept hospital floors to pay for his night classes. He ate rice and beans for 4 years to start his first real estate firm. He wore the same pair of boots until the soles fell off. My mother worked double shifts at a diner to help him make payroll during their first year. That is my family legacy. He gestured toward Camille, who stood perfectly straight watching her son with an expression of fierce, unwavering pride. We do not measure worth by the label on a dress or the size of a ballroom. Desmond continued, turning his searing gaze back to Chelsea. We measure it by integrity. We measure it by honor. We measure it by the refusal to lie, cheat, and steal to get ahead. My parents built an empire because people trusted their word. They would rather have seen us get married in a courthouse wearing sweatpants than stand in a room paid for by defrauding a family member. Chelsea let out a small wounded sound, shrinking back from the intensity of his words. You did not just lie about money, Desmond said, his voice dropping to a register of pure, concentrated contempt. You stood there and let me believe you were someone else. You watched your parents forge your sister's signature. You let them steal her inheritance. And then when she walked into this room, you had the audacity to call her trash. You screamed at a waiter. You attacked my family's values. You have absolutely no concept of what true wealth actually means. Desmond. No, Chelsea begged, reaching for him. Do not touch me, he commanded, his voice cracking like a whip. He looked at her one last time, taking in the full measure of the woman he had married. The illusion was dead. The carefully constructed facade of the sophisticated, wealthy socialite had completely burned to the ground, leaving nothing but a desperate, greedy shell. You are not a victim here, Chelsea, Desmond said, delivering the final crushing blow. You are an accomplice. Desmond broke eye contact. He turned his back on his weeping bride, leaving her isolated in the center of the dance floor. He did not look at my parents. He did not look at the guests. He set his jaw, his shoulders squared with absolute furious determination. Desmond marched directly past the horrified onlookers, his long strides carrying him straight toward the raised stage at the front of the ballroom, where the live band had been playing just minutes before. Desmond climbed the short flight of velvet stairs to the elevated stage. The five-piece jazz band, who had been softly playing background music to mask the escalating tension on the dance floor, faltered. The saxophone player lowered his instrument. The pianist froze his hands over the ivory keys. Desmond did not ask for permission. He walked directly to the center microphone stand, grasped the silver microphone, and pulled it free. The sudden screech of audio feedback pierced the heavy, humid air of the ballroom. It was a sharp, grating sound that commanded absolute terrified attention from everyone right there. 150 guests fell dead silent. The low murmur of frantic gossip evaporated instantly. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes ceased. Waiters froze in place, holding silver trays of hot appetizers perfectly still. Every single eye in the opulent room locked onto the groom standing under the blinding stage lights. Desmond looked out over the sea of horrified faces. He looked at his own relatives, the titans of industry and real estate, who were watching him with grim, unwavering support. Then he looked at her extended family and socialite friends, who were shifting uncomfortably in their very seats. They realized they were witnessing a monumental collapse. I apologize to my family and friends who traveled here today, Desmond began. His voice boomed through the massive speakers, echoing off the hand-painted ceilings and the marble pillars. It was not a voice of sorrow. It was the voice of a judge delivering a final, inescapable verdict. But this wedding is over. A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. Several of the bridesmaids covered their mouths in shock. My mother, Patricia, let out a pathetic wail, slumping against a decorative pillar, as if her legs had completely given out today. I cannot and will not marry into a family that commits felony fraud and treats their own blood like garbage, Desmond continued. His words were razor-sharp, slicing through the remaining shreds of her manufactured fairy tale. He did not yell. He did not need to. The sheer cold authority in his tone was infinitely more devastating than any screaming match could ever be. I am instructing my legal team to file for an immediate annulment first thing Monday morning. The marriage certificate we signed an hour ago is effectively void. There will be no union between our two families. There will be no financial ties. This relationship is permanently terminated. The finality of his announcement hit the room like a physical shockwave. Chelsea let out a visceral, agonizing scream. It was not the delicate, calculated cry of a woman trying to garner sympathy. It was the raw, primal shriek of an opportunist watching her ultimate prize burn to ash. Her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the dance floor, the heavy layers of her stolen designer gown pooling around her like a deflated parachute. Her hands clawed at the wet marble, her meticulously styled hair falling right into her face. She sobbed uncontrollably. "No!" Chelsea screamed, her voice hoarse and broken. "No, Desmond! You cannot do this! You cannot leave me! I am your wife! It was a mistake! We can fix it! Please!" Desmond did not even flinch. He stood on the stage, looking down at her with an expression of profound detachment. He had severed the cord. She was no longer his problem. She was just a stranger having a tantrum in a ruined dress. I stood near the edge of the destruction, watching the exact moment Chelsea realized her life was entirely over. The absolute entitlement died. The arrogance that had fueled her for 29 years had crashed into an immovable wall. She had believed that her beauty, her tears, and her manipulative charm could overcome any obstacle. She had believed that crying about wanting a perfect day would somehow excuse the fact that her parents had stolen my own family legacy. She was entirely wrong. She was finally facing someone who valued integrity over aesthetics. The social destruction was complete. Everyone in that ballroom now knew the truth. They knew the wealthy, sophisticated image the entire family had projected was a desperate, criminal, pathetic sham. The whispered rumors would start before the guests even reached the valet stand. Chelsea would be a social pariah by midnight. Her carefully curated status was annihilated. The financial and legal destruction was just beginning. Richard, near the grand exit, suddenly snapped. The reality of his situation had fully materialized. He had lost his billionaire safety net. He had lost the marriage of his daughter. And thanks to my public exposure, he was now facing a federal criminal investigation. The secondary mortgage fraud was out in the open. The bank would be notified. The authorities would be completely called today. He was looking at total bankruptcy and years in a federal penitentiary. The panic mutated into blind, irrational rage. He let out a furious roar, shoving past his weeping wife and a terrified waiter. He charged across the ballroom floor, his face purple with unhinged fury. His dress shoes slipped briefly on the wine-soaked marble, but he caught his balance, his eyes locked entirely on Desmond. He wanted to silence the man who had just destroyed his last hope of survival. He wanted to tear the microphone away and shout desperate, impossible lies to the entirely shocked, silent crowd. "Desmond, you arrogant bastard!" Richard bellowed, his voice cracking with desperation as he sprinted toward the velvet stairs of the stage. "You are not going to humiliate us like this. I will not let you destroy my family." Desmond did not step back. He simply watched Richard charge, his posture, relaxed, his expression unbothered. He knew he did not have to defend himself. Before his foot could even touch the first velvet step, a massive figure moved from the shadows near the band equipment. Winston moved with terrifying, practiced speed. The older man completely intercepted the charging fraud right there. Winston did not flinch. He did not raise his hands in a defensive posture. He simply stepped squarely into Richard's path, an immovable wall of bespoke tailoring and decades of ruthless corporate dominance. Richard slammed into him, the impact knocking the breath from my father's lungs, but Winston barely swayed. He reached out with one massive hand and gripped the lapel of Richard's tuxedo, twisting the expensive fabric until it tightened like a noose around Richard's neck. The frantic, manic energy drained out of my father in an instant, replaced by the suffocating terror of a man who suddenly realized he was completely outmatched. Winston stared down at him, his expression an impenetrable mask of pure, concentrated authority. The silence in the ballroom deepened, broken only by Chelsea's pathetic, echoing sobs from the dance floor. "You are not going to take another step toward my son, Winston," stated his voice, a low, terrifying rumble that carried the weight of a judge passing a final sentence. You are going to stand exactly where you are, and you are going to listen. Richard was trembling now. The sheer proximity to Winston's wealth and power seemed to short-circuit whatever remained of his rational brain. His rage evaporated instantly, replaced by a grotesque crawling desperation. He looked at Winston, not as a furious father-in-law, but as a walking bailout. "Winston, please, Richard," gasped, his hands flying up in a placating gesture. "You have to understand the pressure we have been under. The market shifted. The supply chains broke. We were just trying to maintain our position. But we can fix this. We can merge. You have the capital and I have the infrastructure. We can absorb my company into your holding group. It makes perfect business sense. We can keep the families united. You can save us, Winston. We are practically family now. You cannot just let us go under. A merger would stabilize everything. It would protect the legacy." Richard was sweating profusely, his words tumbling over each other in a pathetic, breathless pitch. He was trying to sell a bankrupt hollow shell of a company to a billionaire predator while standing in the ruins of a fraudulent wedding. He actually believed his own delusion. He believed that Winston would write a check to sweep the scandal under the rug. Winston released his grip on Richard's tuxedo. He smoothed his own lapel, a gesture of absolute disdain, as if wiping away dirt. He looked at my father like a piece of garbage stuck to the bottom of his shoe. "Merge with you," Winston repeated, tasting the words with visible revulsion. "You have absolutely nothing I want, Richard. Your company is a rotting carcass. Your assets are heavily leveraged. Your reputation is about to be destroyed, and your moral compass is non-existent. You think I build my empire by bailing out incompetent frauds. You think I would tie my family name to a man who steals from his own flesh and blood to pay for a party?" Richard's face flushed a deep, mottled red, but he could not speak. The utter humiliation paralyzed him. Winston took a slow, deliberate step forward, forcing Richard to stumble backward. "But there is a business update you should be aware of," Winston continued, his voice echoing loudly across the silent room. "You see, while you were busy taking out illegal secondary mortgages and forging documents, I was finalizing a rather significant acquisition. My conglomerate just finalized the purchase of a rising healthcare technology firm. We secured a majority stake yesterday morning." The room was deathly quiet. I watched my father's eyes dart wildly, trying to understand where Winston was going with this. "The company is Health Tech Innovations," Winston stated clearly. "The founder and chief executive officer is Blair. Your daughter. The one you just committed wire fraud against." Richard stopped breathing. Patricia, still cowering near the exit doors, let out a loud, horrified gasp. Chelsea ceased her sobbing, her tear-streaked face snapping up to look at me in pure shock. "That is right," Winston said, delivering the final fatal blow. "My conglomerate just acquired Blair's company for $80 million. She is our newest executive partner, which means, Richard, you did not just forge a document belonging to a nurse. You committed felony fraud against a senior executive of my corporation. We do not do business with felons. Expect my legal team to contact you on Monday morning regarding the theft you committed against my partner. We will be pursuing the maximum legal penalty alongside the federal authorities." The devastation was absolute. Richard swayed on his feet, his knees buckling slightly as the reality of his impending imprisonment and total financial ruin crushed the last of his breath. He had nothing left. He had traded his dignity, his daughter, and his freedom for an illusion, and Winston had just shattered it into a million irreparable pieces. Winston did not wait for a response. He had delivered the execution, and he was done looking at the corpse. He turned away from Richard smoothly and buttoned his suit jacket. He looked toward the stage where Desmond stood, then over to the dance floor, where Camille was waiting. Winston gave a single sharp nod. The signal was clear. The groom's side of the room moved in perfect synchronized harmony. Desmond stepped down from the stage, walking past Chelsea without a single downward glance. Camille turned on her heel, her stained vintage silk gown sweeping across the marble. 150 members of the groom's family and friends set down their crystal champagne flutes, picked up their evening bags, and began marching toward the grand exit doors in absolute deafening silence. They did not say a word. They simply abandoned the sinking ship, leaving my toxic family standing alone in a sea of imported flowers and broken promises. I watched them leave. The venue staff locked the doors and demanded the $75,000 balance. The heavy mahogany doors sealed shut with a resounding click. The sound echoed through the cavernous space. Minutes ago, the room had vibrated with forced laughter. Now it was a magnificent tomb. Half-empty champagne flutes sat abandoned on the pristine tablecloths. The jazz band had vanished, leaving their instruments sitting silently on the stage. The only remaining occupants were the venue manager, 2 security guards, and my ruined family. Mr. Sterling stepped forward. His fawning smile was gone, replaced by a cold, rigid glare. He held a leather folio containing the final invoice. He marched toward Richard, flanked by guards blocking the exits. "Mr. Adams," Mr. Sterling stated, "the groom has departed, and all financial obligations for this reception now fall entirely upon you. The remaining balance is exactly $75,000. I require an immediate wire transfer right now." Richard stared at the folio, his face a ghastly gray. His hands trembled uncontrollably as he patted his pockets. He pulled out a black credit card and handed it over, panicking. "Try this one," Richard muttered. Mr. Sterling signaled a staff member holding a mobile payment terminal. The machine beeped sharply. "Declined," Mr. Sterling announced. "Your accounts are frozen. We were informed about the federal wire fraud investigation. You will provide a wire transfer from a solvent account immediately, or I will summon the authorities for grand theft of services." Patricia let out a strangled gasp. She looked around the empty ballroom, her eyes wide with terror. The meticulously crafted illusion she had spent her entire adult life defending was gone. She was not a wealthy matriarch hosting the social event of the season. She was a broke, fraudulent woman about to be arrested in the abandoned wedding reception. "Richard, do something," Patricia hissed, grabbing his arm. "Call the bank. Call your investors." "There are no investors," Patricia Richards snapped, turning on her with sudden vicious resentment. "They are all gone. Winston bought the only company willing to bail us out. We have nothing. The bank is going to call the police about the forged house deed by Monday morning. We are going to federal prison." Chelsea, who had been sitting on the floor in a puddle of expensive silk and tulle, let out another agonizing wail. She crawled toward her father, grabbing his pant leg. "You have to fix this, Daddy. You promised me a perfect day. You promised me I would be a billionaire wife. Do not let them take me to jail. I cannot go to jail." Richard looked down at his weeping, ruined golden child. Then slowly his eyes dragged across the empty dance floor until they locked onto me. I had not moved. I stood near the edge of the room, my arms crossed, watching the entire spectacle with absolute clinical detachment. I was wearing the simple, understated dress they had mocked hours earlier. Now I was the only person in the room who possessed actual power. Winston spoke. His words echoed in the dead silence of the ballroom. $80 million. Executive partner. I watched the realization hit my father. The arrogant, condescending patriarch who had spent 29 years treating me like a worthless burden suddenly saw me not as a daughter, but as a bank vault. His pride, the massive, bloated ego that had driven him to steal from me, finally shattered completely. Richard took a step toward me. His legs wobbled. He looked like an old, broken man. He closed the distance between us, his breathing ragged and shallow. When he was 3 feet away, he did the one thing I never in my wildest dreams thought I would ever witness. My father dropped to his knees. The thud of his kneecaps hitting the solid marble floor was incredibly loud. He looked up at me, his eyes brimming with desperate, pathetic tears. "Blair, please." Richard begged, his voice cracking. "Please, you have to help us. You heard Winston. You have $80 million. You are rich. You are an executive. You have the power to stop this." Patricia gasped, but when she saw her husband kneeling, her own survival instinct kicked in. She scrambled across the floor, not even bothering to stand up. She crawled in her designer gown, ruining the expensive fabric against the spilled champagne, until she was kneeling right next to him. She grabbed my hand. Her skin was freezing cold and clammy with sweat. "Blair, my sweet girl," Patricia sobbed, clinging to my fingers like a drowning woman holding a life raft. "We are so sorry. We were just so desperate to give your sister a good life. We made a terrible mistake, but you have more money than you could ever spend now. $75,000 is nothing to you. It is pocket change. Please pay this venue manager. Then you can pay off the forged loan. You can make the bank go away. You can save your father from federal prison." Chelsea dragged herself over, completing the grotesque portrait of misery. She looked up at me, her makeup running in thick black rivers down her cheeks, her tiara sitting crookedly in her tangled hair. She reached out and grabbed the hem of my simple dress. "Blair, please." Chelsea wept, her voice high and whiny. "I will do anything. I will apologize to everyone. I will give you back the master bedroom. I will never insult your clothes again. Just write the check. You are my big sister. You are supposed to protect me. Please do not let my life end like this. Save us, Blair. Please save your family." I looked down at the three of them. The father who had stolen my future. The mother who had enabled him. The sister who had delighted in my torment. They were kneeling at my feet, groveling in the wreckage of their own greed, begging the scapegoat to become their savior. The manager watched me. I held their entire future in my hands. Now, I looked down at the three people kneeling on the sticky marble floor. My father, who always equated my worth to a balance sheet, was bankrupt. My mother, who had meticulously crafted an image of flawless aristocratic superiority, was reduced to a weeping, disheveled mess. Chelsea, the golden child who thrived on my pain, was clawing at the hem of my dress like a desperate animal. Society dictates that when blood relatives beg for their lives, you are supposed to cave. You are supposed to sacrifice yourself to save them. But looking at them now, I felt absolutely nothing. There was no anger left in my chest. There was only a profound, chilling emptiness. I did not yell. I did not cry. I simply stared at the hands clutching my skirt and slowly, deliberately stepped back, forcing Chelsea's fingers to slip off the fabric. She let out another pathetic sob, reaching for me again, but I held up a single hand, stopping her dead in her tracks. Mr. Sterling stood a few feet away, watching the pathetic display with undisguised disgust. "You want me to save you," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and ice-cold. "You want me to write a check to cover the venue, pay off the forged loan, and make the federal investigators disappear. You want me to play the dutiful daughter, the human shield you can use to absorb the consequences of your own criminal greed." Richard looked up, his eyes wide with a frantic, desperate hope. "Yes, Blair," he gasped, his chest heaving. "We are your family. You cannot just abandon us. We will change. We will make it up to you." I tilted my head, studying his terrified face. "I remember a different conversation about family," I replied, my tone flattening into a razor-thin line of detachment. "It was exactly 6 years ago. I was standing in your immaculate home office. I was working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on while attending nursing school. I came to you because I needed $2,000 to cover my final tuition payment. I begged you. I told you I would work for the company for free to pay it off. Do you remember what you said to me, Richard?" My father flinched, the color draining from his face. Patricia covered her mouth, her sobbing turning into shallow, panicked gasps. "You looked me right in the eye." I continued enunciating every single syllable with lethal precision. "And you told me failures do not belong in this family. You told me I was a disappointment who chose a mediocre path, and you refused to waste a single cent on a bad investment. You told me to figure it out myself." I let the words hang in the air. "You were right," I whispered. "Failures do not belong in this family. And right now, looking at the three of you begging on the floor, I am looking at the biggest failures I have ever seen." Chelsea let out a raw, guttural shriek. "Blair, please!" she screamed. I am your sister. They will put me in jail. I ignored her completely. She was dead air to me. I turned my attention away from the pathetic scene and looked directly at Mr. Sterling. He stiffened, anticipating my next move. I opened my small leather clutch. I bypassed the corporate black cards and the heavy platinum credit cards. Instead, I pulled out a single crisp $50 bill. I stepped over my mother's sprawling gown, walking calmly toward the venue manager. I extended my hand, offering him the cash. Mr. Sterling looked at the bill, confused. "What is this, Ms. Adams?" he asked hesitantly. "Payment for services rendered," I stated clearly. I had one glass of the house Pinot Noir while waiting for the ceremony to begin. This should cover the cost of the wine, plus a generous tip for the bartender. Mr. Sterling slowly took the $50 bill from my fingers. "And the remaining $75,000, he asked, his eyes darting toward my kneeling family. I looked back at Richard over my shoulder. The corners of my mouth curled into a faint, merciless smile. "That is entirely Richard's problem," I replied. "I suggest you call the authorities immediately, Mr. Sterling." My father let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. "Blair, no, you cannot do this. We will lose everything." I did not bother to respond. I had already given them more words than they deserved. I turned my back on them, the motion swift and final. I did not look at Chelsea's ruined tiara. I did not look at Patricia's stained dress. I did not look at Richard's broken kneeling form. I simply began to walk. The heavy double doors of the grand ballroom loomed ahead of me. Each step I took sounded like a gavel striking wood, finalizing the verdict. Chelsea's wailing grew louder, a chaotic symphony of pure, unadulterated despair echoing behind me, but it faded into background noise. I reached the massive mahogany doors and pushed them open. I stepped out of the stifling, oppressive heat of the ballroom and into the cool, crisp night air of the city. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen. For the first time in 29 years, I was completely free. The suffocating weight of their expectations, their cruelty, and their constant demands evaporated into the night. I walked down the grand stone steps of the venue. Exactly 1 month later, the true scale of the devastation became impossible to ignore. The crisp autumn air had settled over the city, but the chill was nothing compared to the freezing reality my former family was experiencing. I sat in my spacious corner office at Health Tech Innovations, overlooking the skyline. My assistant knocked softly, holding the morning newspaper. She placed it on my desk. The headline was printed in bold, unforgiving black ink. It revealed the immediate, brutal fallout. The heavy mahogany doors sealed shut with a resounding click. The sound echoed through the cavernous space. Minutes ago, the room had vibrated with forced laughter. Now it was a magnificent tomb. Half-empty champagne flutes sat abandoned on the pristine tablecloths. The jazz band had vanished, leaving their instruments sitting silently on the stage. The only remaining occupants were the venue manager, 2 security guards, and my ruined family. Mr. Sterling stepped forward. His fawning smile was gone, replaced by a cold, rigid glare. He held a leather folio containing the final invoice. He marched toward Richard, flanked by guards blocking the exits. "Mr. Adams," Mr. Sterling stated, "the groom has departed and all financial obligations for this reception now fall entirely upon you. The remaining balance is exactly $75,000. I require an immediate wire transfer right now." Richard stared at the folio, his face a ghastly gray. His hands trembled uncontrollably as he patted his pockets. He pulled out a black credit card and handed it over, panicking. "Try this one," Richard muttered. Mr. Sterling signaled a staff member holding a mobile payment terminal. The machine beeped sharply. "Declined," Mr. Sterling announced. "Your accounts are frozen. We were informed about the federal wire fraud investigation. You will provide a wire transfer from a solvent account immediately, or I will summon the authorities for grand theft of services." Patricia let out a strangled gasp. She looked around the empty ballroom, her eyes wide with terror. The meticulously crafted illusion she had spent her entire adult life defending was gone. She was not a wealthy matriarch hosting the social event of the season. She was a broke, fraudulent woman about to be arrested in the abandoned wedding reception. "Richard, do something," Patricia hissed, grabbing his arm. "Call the bank. Call your investors. There are no investors," Patricia, Richard snapped, turning on her with sudden, vicious resentment. "They are all gone. Winston bought the only company willing to bail us out. We have nothing. The bank is going to call the police about the forged house deed by Monday morning. We are going to federal prison." Chelsea, who had been sitting on the floor in a puddle of expensive silk and tulle, let out another agonizing wail. She crawled toward her father, grabbing his pant leg. "You have to fix this, Daddy. You promised me a perfect day. You promised me I would be a billionaire wife. Do not let them take me to jail. I cannot go to jail." Richard looked down at his weeping, ruined golden child. Then slowly his eyes dragged across the empty dance floor until they locked onto me. I had not moved. I stood near the edge of the room, my arms crossed, watching the entire spectacle with absolute clinical detachment. I was wearing the simple, understated dress they had mocked hours earlier. Now I was the only person in the room who possessed actual power. Winston spoke. His words echoed in the dead silence of the ballroom. $80 million. Executive partner. I watched the realization hit my father. The arrogant, condescending patriarch who had spent 29 years treating me like a worthless burden suddenly saw me not as a daughter, but as a bank vault. His pride, the massive, bloated ego that had driven him to steal from me, finally shattered completely. Richard took a step toward me. His legs wobbled. He looked like an old, broken man. He closed the distance between us, his breathing ragged and shallow. When he was 3 feet away, he did the one thing I never in my wildest dreams thought I would ever witness. My father dropped to his knees. The thud of his kneecaps hitting the solid marble floor was incredibly loud. He looked up at me, his eyes brimming with desperate, pathetic tears. "Blair, please," Richard begged, his voice cracking. "Please, you have to help us." "You heard, Winston. You have $80 million. You are rich. You are an executive. You have the power to stop this." Patricia gasped, but when she saw her husband kneeling, her own survival instinct kicked in. She scrambled across the floor, not even bothering to stand up. She crawled in her designer gown, ruining the expensive fabric against the spilled champagne, until she was kneeling right next to him. She grabbed my hand. Her skin was freezing cold and clammy with sweat. "Blair, my sweet girl." Patricia sobbed, clinging to my fingers like a drowning woman holding a life raft. "We are so sorry. We were just so desperate to give your sister a good life. We made a terrible mistake. But you have more money than you could ever spend now. $75,000 is nothing to you. It is pocket change. Please pay this venue manager. Then you can pay off the forged loan. You can make the bank go away. You can save your father from federal prison." Chelsea dragged herself over, completing the grotesque portrait of misery. She looked up at me, her makeup running in thick black rivers down her cheeks, her tiara sitting crookedly in her tangled hair. She reached out and grabbed the hem of my simple dress. "Blair, please." Chelsea wept, her voice high and whiny. "I will do anything. I will apologize to everyone. I will give you back the master bedroom. I will never insult your clothes again. Just write the check. You are my big sister. You are supposed to protect me. Please do not let my life end like this. Save us, Blair. Please save your family." I looked down at the 3 of them. The father who had stolen my future, the mother who had enabled him, the sister who had delighted in my torment. They were kneeling at my feet, groveling in the wreckage of their own greed, begging the scapegoat to become their savior. The manager watched me. I held their entire future in my hands. Now, the harsh fluorescent lights of the local coffee shop buzzed annoyingly above Chelsea's head. She stood at the counter, her oversized sunglasses failing to hide the exhausted circles beneath her eyes. Her high society life, the billionaire groom, and the endless luxury were completely evaporated. The annulment had been finalized in record time, erasing her marriage before it truly began. Her former friends had blocked her number the second the wire fraud scandal hit the evening news. That will be $6, the barista said, popping a gum bubble. Chelsea pulled out a platinum credit card, handing it over with a practiced sigh. She waited for the familiar beep of approval. Instead, the machine let out a sharp, angry buzz. Decline, the barista stated. Chelsea felt her face burn. Try it again, she snapped, digging into her faded designer purse. There must be a glitch. The barista swiped it. Same buzz. Declined again. You got cash or another card? Panic clawed at Chelsea's throat. She handed over a gold card, then a blue one. Both were rejected instantly. The bank had frozen everything. She had exactly $0 to her name. The line behind her groaned impatiently. A teenager in a hoodie stepped around her and dropped a $10 bill on the counter. I will cover her coffee, the teenager muttered, looking at Chelsea with pure pity. Just let me pay for mine so I can get to class. The absolute humiliation of accepting charity from a high school student forced Chelsea to grab her coffee and flee the shop. She sat on a dirty park bench outside, staring at her manicured hands. The reality of her situation was a suffocating nightmare. She had no money, no skills, and no wealthy parents to bail her out. She had to do the one thing she had mocked others for doing her entire life. She had to get a job. 2 weeks later, Chelsea found herself wearing a cheap, scratchy polyester uniform polo shirt. She had been hired as a retail associate at a low-end discount clothing boutique in a strip mall. It was the only place that did not require a college degree or actual work experience. Her days consisted of folding endless piles of poorly made sweaters, cleaning out the fitting rooms, and enduring the rude demands of bargain hunters. Her feet ached constantly. The minimum wage she earned barely covered the rent for the moldy studio apartment she now shared with 3 other girls. Every time she scrubbed a scuff mark off the linoleum floor, she thought about the marble floors of her old bedroom. She was a ghost of her former self, trapped in a relentless, exhausting cycle of poverty. The bell above the boutique door jingled, signaling another customer. Chelsea was on her knees, picking up a pile of graphic shirts that a toddler had knocked over. She sighed, her back aching, and slowly stood up to greet the new arrival. "Welcome to Bargain Bin Boutique," she mumbled, reciting the mandatory corporate greeting without looking up. "Let me know if you need help finding your size." "Thank you," a calm, familiar voice replied. "I am just looking for a small gift bag for a colleague." Chelsea froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She slowly lifted her head. Standing in the middle of the cheap, cluttered aisle was Blair. My sister looked absolutely radiant. She wore a tailored, charcoal suit that screamed quiet luxury, a silk blouse and elegant leather loafers. Her hair was perfectly styled and she held a sleek, expensive briefcase. The aura of effortless power surrounding her was unmistakable. Blair stopped in front of a rack of clearance scarves, her eyes scanning the messy display. She turned her head slightly and locked eyes with Chelsea. The air in the tiny store vanished. Chelsea felt her entire body flush with a sickening wave of absolute mortification. She was wearing a hideous polyester uniform, holding a stack of cheap shirts while her older sister stood there looking like a billionaire executive. Blair did not laugh. She did not smirk. She did not mock the ridiculous uniform or the pathetic state of Chelsea's life. She simply walked up to the counter holding a small generic gift bag she had pulled from the front display. She set it down gently. "Just this, please," Blair said softly. Chelsea's hands shook violently. She could not speak. The lump in her throat was so massive it choked off her air supply. She reached for the gift bag, her fingers fumbling over the barcode. She scanned it, the machine beeping loudly in the dead silence of the store. "That will be $2.15, Chelsea whispered, her voice cracking. She stared at the scratched countertop, completely unable to meet Blair's steady, confident gaze. Blair opened her designer wallet. She did not pull out a heavy metal black card to show off. She simply pulled out a crisp, brand-new $100 bill and placed it gently on the counter. "Keep the change," Blair stated quietly. "You look like you could use a good tip today." Chelsea stared at the $100 bill. It was a lifeline. It was groceries for a week. But it was also the ultimate final destruction of her pride. If Blair had screamed at her, Chelsea could have fought back. If Blair had laughed, Chelsea could have justified her own resentment. But Blair was simply being polite. Blair was treating her with the detached, generous kindness reserved for absolute strangers. "Thank you!" Chelsea choked out tears spilling over her eyelashes and dripping onto the cheap linoleum floor. She had never felt so utterly, completely insignificant in her entire life. The realization that she was no longer a rival, but merely an object of pity, crushed her soul. Blair gave a polite professional nod. She turned, exiting the store. Meanwhile, Richard sat in his dark apartment, opening his freshly delivered criminal court summons today. The stark lighting of the federal courthouse offered no place to hide. Richard sat at the defense table looking diminished in a suit that seemed too large. His arrogant swagger was entirely absent, replaced by the twitchy energy of a cornered animal. I sat in the gallery, my posture perfect, my expression an unreadable mask of absolute calm. Desmond sat beside me with a leather binder. We were there to witness the execution of the law. The heavy oak doors opened and the bailiff instructed the room to rise. Judge Harrison took her seat at the bench. She was known for her merciless approach to white-collar crime. Her severe mouth indicated she had no patience for this spectacle. Richard's attorney, a miracle worker whose retainer had drained Patricia's jewelry fund, stood to address the court. He attempted to paint a picture of a loving patriarch. He paced in front of the judge, gesturing. "Your Honor." He began, his voice dripping with sincerity. "This is not a calculated scheme of malice. It is a simple family misunderstanding. Richard Adams found himself in a temporary cash flow crisis. He intended to borrow against the property, temporarily planning to restore the funds before anyone knew. He believed he was acting in the best interest of his entire family, including his daughter. He never intended to permanently deprive her of her assets. This is a civil dispute disguised as a criminal matter." Judge Harrison did not blink. She turned to the federal prosecutor. The prosecutor stood. He did not need theatrical gestures. He simply needed facts. "Your Honor," the prosecutor stated flatly, "calling this crime a family misunderstanding is frankly insulting to the court. The defendant did not borrow funds. He deliberately and maliciously forged a signature on a legal deed. He conspired with a notary to authorize a fraudulent secondary mortgage. He then diverted those stolen funds to pay for an extravagant wedding reception." The prosecutor handed the clerk a tall stack of documents. "Thanks to the records provided by Ms. Blair Adams, we have a flawless paper trail. We have the forged documents. We have the time-stamped wire transfers. We have the emails where the defendant explicitly instructed his accountant to conceal the transaction. This was a calculated, deliberate felony." Judge Harrison reviewed the documents. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Richard was sweating visibly, his hands gripping the edge of the defense table so tightly his knuckles were white. After several agonizing minutes, the judge looked up. "Mr. Adams," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a whip, "you have abused the trust of your own flesh and blood to finance a lifestyle you could not afford. You committed federal wire fraud and felony forgery. I find the defense's argument of a family misunderstanding completely without merit. You are a thief." Judge Harrison adjusted her glasses. "I sentence you to 5 years of supervised federal probation. You are ordered to pay full restitution of the stolen funds, plus punitive damages amounting to $300,000. Furthermore, as a convicted felon, your financial licenses are hereby revoked permanently. You will never hold a corporate executive position or manage another individual's assets for the rest of your natural life." The gavel fell with a deafening crack. Richard collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. His career, his reputation, and his legacy were completely obliterated. I stood up, smoothing the skirt of my dress. Desmond gave me a brief, satisfied nod. We walked out of the courtroom together, the heavy doors closed behind us, muting the sound of Richard's pathetic sobbing. I stepped into the bright, echoing hallway of the courthouse. Patricia was waiting near the elevators. She looked terrible. The stress of the past month had aged her a decade. She wore a plain dress, her designer wardrobe having been seized by the bankruptcy liquidators. When she saw me, her eyes lit up with a desperate, crawling hope. She rushed toward me, her hands outstretched. Blair, she pleaded, her voice cracking. Please wait. I stopped, looking down at her with mild clinical curiosity. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my sleeve. You have to help me. Blair. Patricia begged, tears streaming down her face. They took the house. They took the cars. They seized my bank accounts. I have absolutely nothing left. I do not even know how I am going to buy groceries this week. You are so successful now. You have millions. You can spare a little something for your own mother. Just a small allowance to help me get back on my feet. Please, Blair. You cannot leave me to starve. I gently but firmly pried her fingers off my arm. I opened my briefcase. I bypassed my checkbook. I bypassed my cash. I pulled out a small, glossy pamphlet and handed it to her. Patricia took it, looking down in confusion. What is this? She asked. It is a brochure for a free financial literacy class at the community center, I replied evenly. They teach you how to budget a minimum wage paycheck. I highly recommend it. I turned my back on her bewildered, horrified face and walked toward the elevators. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside. As the doors closed, silencing my mother's indignant gasp, my phone began to vibrate in my pocket. I pulled it out and glanced at the caller identification. It was Winston. I pressed the screen and brought the phone to my ear. Hello, Winston, I answered. Blair Winston's voice filled the speaker. I just received the news regarding your father's sentencing. Congratulations on closing that rather unpleasant chapter. However, we have much bigger things to discuss. I need you in my office first thing tomorrow morning. I have been reviewing our international portfolio, and I have a massive new business proposition for you. It will change our entire industry. I smiled, watching the numbers descend. I will be there, Winston. 6 months later, the doors of the private elevator slid open, revealing the crowning achievement of that phone call. I stepped out into the sunlit reception area of the Sterling Adams MedTech Foundation. The space was a masterpiece of modern architecture. Massive glass panels offered a panoramic view of the Boston skyline, the exact skyline that had once felt like a cage when I lived under my father's roof. Now it was my kingdom. The floors were polished white quartz, reflecting the morning light, and the walls featured tasteful, understated digital displays detailing our mission statement. There were no heavy mahogany desks or suffocating leather chairs here. The environment was intentionally designed to represent transparency, progress, and a clean break from the past. Winston Sterling stood by the digital interactive display near the boardroom, reviewing the final press packet. He looked up as I approached, his sharp eyes crinkling at the corners. He handed me a sleek silver tablet. The initial funding transfers cleared this morning. Blair Winston announced, his voice echoing slightly in the vast open space. The $80 million is fully integrated into the operational accounts. We are officially live. I took the tablet, scrolling through the financial summaries with clinical precision. Our partnership had evolved rapidly, from a simple buyout to a massive philanthropic and business endeavor. Winston had recognized my absolute refusal to simply sit on a mountain of inherited wealth. I wanted to build something that fundamentally dismantled the kind of elitist, exclusionary empire my father had worshipped. Together, we established this foundation to build and fund excellent trauma centers in severely underserved communities across the country. It was a calculated, devastating blow to the old guard of Boston high society. While Richard Adams had stolen from his own flesh and blood to finance ice sculptures and caviar, his disgraced daughter was using her reclaimed fortune to save lives in neighborhoods he would not even drive through. The press coverage had been phenomenal. The narrative of the betrayed daughter rising from the ashes of her family's criminal ruin to build a medical empire was catnip for the media. I had become the face of modern ethical wealth. The mayor will be arriving in 20 minutes for the ceremony, Winston noted, checking his watch. The press pool is already setting up in the main atrium. We have representatives from all the major financial and medical networks. Are you ready for the circus? I handed the tablet back to him, smoothing the lapels of my tailored navy suit. I spent almost 30 years surviving a circus, Winston. A few cameras will not break my stride. Winston smiled, a rare expression of genuine warmth. You have done extraordinary work, Blair. I will go make sure the security detail has the perimeter locked down. Enjoy the moment. You earned it. As Winston walked toward the security desk, the heavy glass door to the main conference room swung open. Desmond walked out carrying a thick stack of audited financial reports. He wore a sharp gray suit, looking entirely in his element. When I had formed the foundation, there was only one person I trusted to manage the money. Desmond had left his prestigious downtown firm to become the lead financial auditor for our entire operation. He knew every dark corner of corporate fraud, which made him the perfect guardian for my new empire. Desmond stopped in front of me, tapping the stack of reports with his pen. The accounts are bulletproof, he stated, his tone strictly professional. Every cent of the startup capital is accounted for, and the first quarter projections for the trauma centers are running 12% under budget. We are operating with absolute crystalline efficiency. I nodded, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. Excellent work, Desmond. I expected nothing less. He looked at me, his expression softening just a fraction. It was a look of deep, mutual understanding. We had both stood in the wreckage of that abandoned wedding reception. We had both navigated the treacherous, toxic waters of the Addams family. There was no sweeping romance between us, no dramatic confessions of love born from shared trauma. We were simply two pragmatic, highly capable professionals who had survived a war and emerged victorious on the other side. Desmond shifted his briefcase to his left hand and extended his right hand toward me. I suppose this is it, he said, his voice steady. The final nail in the coffin of the old life. The accounts are clean, the criminals are sentenced, and the future is fully funded. I looked at his outstretched hand. It represented the closing of a door I never wanted to open again. I reached out and gripped his hand firmly. The handshake was solid, a pact between survivors. Thank you, Desmond, I said quietly, holding his gaze, for believing the numbers when no one else would, for standing by me in that courtroom. I could not have dismantled that empire without you. You gave me the blueprints, Blair, Desmond replied, releasing my hand. I just pointed out where the structure was rotting. Now go cut that ribbon. You have an empire to run. He gave me a brief, respectful nod and walked past me toward his office. I turned my attention back to the main atrium. The murmur of the gathering crowd drifted through the glass partitions. Flashbulbs were already popping as politicians and hospital administrators mingled near the red velvet ribbon. I took a deep breath, feeling absolute, undeniable power radiating through my veins. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was Blair Adams, chief executive of the MedTech Foundation. I began walking toward the atrium. The mayor stepped forward, a broad smile plastered across his face, preparing to shake my hand. Suddenly, a violent commotion erupted near the back doors. The polished professional atmosphere shattered instantly. Journalists shouted in surprise. My security chief surged forward. Someone bypassed the freight elevators, he yelled. Before guards could react, an uninvited guest appeared. The heavy glass doors leading to the service corridor slammed open with a deafening crash. The sound reverberated across the pristine white quartz floors of the atrium. The mayor froze, his outstretched hand suspended in midair. The pleasant murmur of the gathered politicians, hospital administrators, and investors vanished, replaced by a collective gasp of shock. The wall of cameras previously focused on the red velvet ribbon instantly pivoted toward the source of the disruption. Chelsea stumbled into the brilliant morning light of the lobby. She looked completely unhinged. She was still wearing the hideous, scratchy polyester polo shirt from the discount boutique, stained with spilled coffee and wrinkled from a brutal commute. Her blonde hair, once her crowning glory, hung in stringy, unwashed clumps around her face. Her makeup was smudged, giving her a frantic, hollow look. She was breathing heavily, her chest heaving as she scanned the massive room. The contrast was jarring. She stood in the center of a billion-dollar medical foundation, surrounded by Boston's elite, looking like a discarded afterthought. Security personnel immediately converged on her, their dark suits forming a barrier. 2 guards grabbed her arms to escort her out. "Get your hands off me!" Chelsea shrieked, her voice shrill and grating. She thrashed against the guards, digging the heels of her scuffed sneakers into the floor. "You cannot throw me out. I am her sister. I am Blair Adams's sister. Let me go right now." The flashing of camera bulbs accelerated into a blinding strobe effect. The press pool murmured, smelling blood in the water. This was the exact kind of scandal the media lived for. The disgraced golden child crashing the triumphant debut of the new philanthropic queen. Winston took a step forward, his expression darkening with irritation. He signaled for the guards to remove her with force, but I raised my hand, stopping him. I stepped away from the mayor and walked to the edge of the velvet rope that separated the executive presentation area from the main floor. I looked down at the pathetic, thrashing figure of my younger sister. "Let her speak," I commanded, my voice projecting clearly across the silent room. The guards released Chelsea's arms and stepped back, remaining on high alert. Chelsea straightened her cheap collar, panting. She glared at me, her eyes wild with a mixture of desperation and deeply ingrained entitlement. She pointed a shaking finger at my tailored navy suit. "You have to fix this," Chelsea demanded, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "You have to give me a job, a real job, an executive job. I am not working in that miserable boutique for minimum wage one more day." The manager yelled at me for taking a 15-minute break. "My feet are covered in blisters. I cannot live like this, Blair. You have all of this money. You have $80 million. You owe me." I stared at her, my face a mask of complete indifference. "I owe you nothing, Chelsea. Your situation is the direct result of your own choices and your father's criminal actions." "We are family!" Chelsea screamed, taking a step toward the VIP section. "We are blood. You cannot just leave me to rot in a studio apartment while you cut ribbons with the mayor. I deserve to be an executive. I went to the best private schools. I know how to host events. I can run this foundation with you. You need me to be the face of this place. You were always the boring one. I have the charm. Just give me a vice president title and a corporate credit card." The sheer delusion of her demands sent a ripple of disbelief through the crowd of medical professionals. The mayor shifted uncomfortably, exchanging a bewildered look with the chief of surgery from Massachusetts General Hospital. I did not shrink away from the cameras. I did not attempt to usher Chelsea into a back room to avoid a scene. I stood my ground, bathed in the flashing lights, and allowed the world to witness exactly who she was. "Chelsea," I said, my voice carrying the steady, unwavering authority of a chief executive officer. "Look around you. Look at the people standing in this room. These are brilliant surgeons, dedicated trauma nurses, and relentless financial auditors. They have spent their entire lives working to build systems that rescue people from the brink of death. They operate on victims of car crashes, industrial accidents, and violent crimes. They work 30-hour shifts to stitch broken bodies back together." I took a slow, deliberate step closer to the velvet rope, locking my gaze onto her frantic eyes. "This foundation is for people who save lives, Chelsea," I stated, enunciating every single syllable. "The only thing you have ever saved is your own ego." A heavy, suffocating silence blanketed the atrium. The truth of my words hit the room with the force of a physical blow. The journalist stopped whispering. The camera flashes briefly paused. Chelsea stood frozen in the center of the quartz floor. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The absolute rejection, delivered clearly and publicly in front of the most powerful people in the city, finally penetrated her thick layer of delusion. She looked around the room, realizing that no one was looking at her with admiration. There was no pity. There was only profound clinical disgust. She was a relic of a fraudulent past, a spoiled child throwing a tantrum in a sanctuary built for serious professionals. The realization did not bring humility. It brought a sudden blinding rage. Her face contorted into an ugly, vicious sneer. Her hands curled into tight fists at her sides. "You think you are better than me?" Chelsea snarled, her eyes burning with pure, unadulterated hatred. Before anyone could even react, Chelsea let out a feral scream and physically charged right past the stunned security guards, diving desperately over the red velvet rope to attack me. Chelsea lunged forward, her hands curled into claws, aiming straight for my face. The air in the atrium seemed to snap. I did not flinch. I simply held my ground and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Before Chelsea could cross the 3 feet separating us, a wall of dark fabric materialized. My lead security guard caught her mid-stride, wrapping a thick arm around her waist. A second guard flanked her right side, securing her flailing arms. "Let me go," Chelsea shrieked, kicking her scuffed sneakers wildly through the air. "You cannot do this! I am family!" The guards hoisted her completely off the polished quartz floor. She was dangling between them like a feral animal, her cheap uniform twisting around her waist. "Remove her from the premises!" I stated, my voice echoing evenly across the stunned crowd. "If she returns, call the police and press charges for trespassing and attempted assault." "You are a monster!" Chelsea screamed, her face purple with rage. She thrashed violently as the guards carried her backward toward the entrance. "You stole my life. You stole my wedding. You owe me everything." The heavy glass doors slid open automatically. The guards marched her straight through them. Her shrieks spilled out onto the busy Boston sidewalk, mingling with the blare of traffic and the hiss of city buses. The glass doors slid shut with a soft, definitive click, abruptly cutting off her voice. She was gone. I smoothed the lapel of my tailored jacket, turning my attention back to the crowd. The journalists were frantically typing on their phones, while the medical executives exchanged wide-eyed glances. The silence in the atrium was absolute. Winston stepped to my right, adjusting his tie. Desmond took his place on my left, his face a mask of professional composure. They did not rush to comfort me. They simply stood there, an impenetrable wall of solidarity and mutual respect. We had all navigated toxic family dynamics. We understood that some ties needed to be severed completely. "I apologize for the interruption," I said to the crowd, my tone light and entirely dismissive. Security breaches are an unfortunate reality of doing business in the city. However, we are not here today to focus on the past or the petty grievances of individuals who refuse to move forward. We are here to focus on the future. I gestured toward the wide red ribbon stretched across the entrance of our new trauma center command hub. The mayor, recovering his political composure, stepped forward with an oversized pair of silver scissors. He offered them to me with a newfound look of profound respect. He had witnessed the absolute destruction of a highly entitled intruder, and he clearly understood who held the power in this room. "Thank you, Mr. Mayor," I said, taking the heavy scissors. I turned to face the cameras. The flashes ignited once again, bathing the room in a brilliant white glow. This foundation was built on the principle that true value is found in what we give back to our communities, not in what we inherit or steal. Today, we open the doors to a new era of medical innovation and accessible trauma care. Today, we leave the rot of the old systems behind. I positioned the blades around the thick velvet ribbon. Winston and Desmond looked on, their expressions reflecting quiet pride. I squeezed the handles. The ribbon parted cleanly, fluttering to the pristine quartz floor. The room erupted in deafening applause. The sound echoed off the glass walls, drowning out any lingering memory of Chelsea's pathetic tantrum. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of handshakes, strategic discussions, and press interviews. I navigated the crowds with effortless grace. I discussed funding allocations with hospital directors, outlined expansion plans with Winston, and reviewed quarterly projections with Desmond. I was entirely in my element. The ghost of the girl who used to shrink in the corners of the Adams mansion was permanently excised. Hours later, the sun began its slow descent over the city. The atrium had emptied out, leaving only the quiet hum of the Foundation's servers and the soft footsteps of the evening security detail. I stepped into the private executive elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. The doors opened to the rooftop terrace. The evening air was crisp and cool. I walked over to the reinforced glass barrier and looked out over the Boston skyline. The city stretched out before me, a sprawling network of glittering lights and towering steel structures. Somewhere down there in the labyrinth of streets, Richard was sitting in a dark apartment, facing federal probation and utter ruin. Somewhere down there, Patricia was learning how to budget a minimum wage paycheck. Somewhere down there, Chelsea was realizing that her golden child status had absolutely zero currency in the real world. I felt no guilt. I felt no lingering resentment. I felt only a profound crystalline emptiness that was rapidly filling with peace. For 29 years, I had been the designated scapegoat. I had been the punching bag, the financial safety net, and the target of endless, suffocating humiliation. I had survived their betrayal, their theft, and their relentless cruelty. I rested my hands on the cool glass. The city looked beautiful from up here. It looked vast and full of opportunity. I had built this empire from the ground up. I had secured my grandfather's hidden legacy, partnered with the most brilliant minds in the industry, and created a foundation that would actively change the world. I was no longer the victim of the Addams family narrative. I was the author of my own destiny. The wind caught my hair, pulling it back from my face. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean, cold air of the evening. I was entirely self-made. I was wildly successful. And for the very first time in my entire life, I was completely free, cut to black.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river. Years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter. In every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my father's daughter. In every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low. But the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet daughter and the woman she becomes. I am my father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my Father's endless love. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile and answer softly.